Welcome to the free sermon podcast of the Potter's House Church in Virginia Beach, affiliated with Christian Fellowship Ministries. Our vision is winning souls, making disciples, and planting churches. It's Tuesday, where you're going to hear a powerful testimony of God's grace revealed in human lives. Each Tuesday, you'll hear Pastor Adam interviewing pastors from around the world to share the mighty miracles that God has done in their lives to give you hope for yours. We share the stories of the men behind the messages you hear every other day on this podcast. Keep in mind that the free version only includes a portion of the whole testimony interview. To listen to the full version, use the links in the show notes to subscribe via Apple Podcasts or supercast.tech. Every dollar goes to supporting world evangelism. Enjoy today's Testimony Tuesday.
All right, and welcome back to the VBPH Sermon Podcast. It is Testimony Tuesday one more time, and we are here with a very special guest, and I'm very pleased to welcome for the first time to our podcast, Pastor Dave Johnson. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
Thanks for taking the time. So we have you in for revival, and we appreciate you taking the time not only to preach a bunch of awesome sermons, and hang out with me and give me some wisdom and inspiration, but also to speak to our podcast audience and share your testimony with us. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, again, it's always a joy to have an opportunity to share what Jesus has done in my life. And being an evangelist, the privilege to be able to travel, to go anywhere, just to be able to share the love of God. And each and every individual's testimony, I believe, is very unique, very, very different, and it's part of what we're called to do. Amen.
That's right. So, for those who may not know you, why don't you just give us the brief bio of your experience?
Well, of course, 1979, I was a young airman stationed on the east part of the Phoenix Valley in a smaller air base called Williams Air Force Base, and came into the church. I had already been saved just for a very short period of time. The congregation at that time was probably just a little over a dozen or so people meeting in a what was once a hot dog stand, very small facility that was there right across from the high school at that time, and hadn't had any thoughts of ministry or anything like that, just trying to put my life together, trying to make sense of our experiences and trying to just discover who Jesus was. And
so for those who heard the testimony with Mr. George Rose, would have been a couple of weeks ago by the time this releases. What was that, about the same time when you came in?
George, dear friend of mine, family very dear to Angie, my wife, and myself as well. When we came into the church, he had already received orders and was serving in the Air Force in California at that time. So I didn't meet George until a couple of years later when he had left the Air Force and returned to Chandler.
Okay. Well, why don't you inform us on your background, how you grew up? What was your family life like?
Well, of course, I grew up in a very rural area in North Dakota, which is a few hours from the Canadian border. Small community that at its zenith was probably 1,300 people or so, called Garrison, on the north shore of Lake Sakakawea. Of course, growing up in that kind of arena is very different than those who are in a more urban area. I didn't have all the noise of traffic and things like that. I was always very fascinated just with the flora, the fauna, some people would say, but just all of the different animals that were around. My mother had been a school teacher and very knowledgeable of the things that were around me. And so I do find that growing up on a farm, I think, is somewhat of an advantage in some ways. Socially, maybe a little bit of a handicap. We're very isolated to a great degree. Weren't around large groups of people. And so in those kind of environments or situations, sometimes you feel very awkward in groups of people. And so when I were in groups of people or whatever, it was difficult for me to communicate. And I think that kind of lent itself to my future experiences, whether it was with alcohol or even drugs. My parents were very good, very moral people. I shared with you the other day my father having been a foster child during a time where the foster care system was tantamount to child slavery to some degree, and not a lot of good experiences on his part. But he had chosen at a very young age to believe the Bible, and taught me a lot of things about God being a father to the fatherless, and actually was laying somewhat of a foundation of my belief that there is a God who does care about people. My teen years, of course, is spending a lot of time working that area of the Midwest. The work hard, play hard ethic is something that often can be somewhat destructive as well. You spend a lot of hours out in the field or working with animals and things of that nature, but then being turned loose. The availability of alcohol was easily accessible to me even at a very early age. And I want to punctuate the understanding is that my parents were very good moral people. They attended church regularly. They didn't drink. They didn't smoke. We didn't keep alcohol in the house. And so they set a very good example. But that didn't prevent me from having access to things that as early as the fifth grade, I found myself friends whose parents had liquor cabinets and things like that. We found ways of siphoning off, alcohol and taking it to school and to events. And eventually, by the time I was in junior high, I was probably getting drunk once, twice a week on a very regular basis.
Wow.
And that sense of awkwardness that I'd had in being in groups of people, I found that if I was drinking, had a beer in my hand, or smoking something or whatever, is that it eased some of those fears or stress. And of course, it became very habitual in itself. And it, of course, created opportunities where you're in company of young girls as well. And I found myself, of course, being sexually active at a very young age also. And these things kind of culminated into some difficulties, later in my life. You don't think about the consequences of the choices that you're making, often when you're that age, and how it can complicate things, bring shame, bring a weight of guilt, and you're just trying to have fun. And I know with and my friends, a lot of things that we did was never malicious or anything like that, but it was just a form of escapism in itself. And all the years that I spent, whether it was on a tractor or whatever, seemed to be a turning point in my life when my father had purchased a tractor with an air-conditioned cab that had an AM/FM radio. And so that was a big change from all of the noise that, I was accustomed to with the other implements and trucks and tractors, etc. And so I was able to listen to baseball and the music, of course, of my generation and sing along. And that began to develop, I guess, a affinity for music, because it was a pleasant respite from all of the noise, or maybe even at times even the silence, of being out on a farm. in itself. And so began singing. People began to take notice at times and began to get involved in not only the school music in itself, but even outside of school. I played saxophone. I began to focus some efforts on those things because it began to get me some attention. Mm-hmm. And then began to be asked to be or to sing for special events, things like that, eventually weddings, and didn't think much of it. It was just kind of fun. It was something that was unique. It was taking me places that education wasn't per se. Right. And eventually it blossomed into traveling different parts of the U.S. and music groups, jazz ensembles, singing groups, etc., again into Canada, kind of culminating in a state-sponsored group that took us international as well, and even some competitions that drew the attention of some celebrities at that time. And Angie Dickinson was an actress that had gained some popularity during the 70s and 80s, movie star, as it were, was married to a songwriter, Burt Bacharach at that time. She had been a guest judge at a competition, state competition performance that was there, and they had extended an invitation for furthering my education in music to Berklee College of Music at that time. And a lot of people seemed to think that, I had a future ahead of me in the entertainment business, in some way. And that was a lot, of course, for me to process as, 17-year-old kid.
I was going to ask you, with some measure of success and some attention that you're getting, what was the condition of your heart? Like, you mentioned how you would find escapism in alcohol. Well, did that continue during this time, or?
Well, actually, it kind of fueled some of that, because now I'm spending larger volumes of time without having adult supervision, mm-hmm. or the adult supervision that I have is not necessarily good examples, people who are providing access to alcohol, and even discovering places where we would go and where I would perform where drinking age was 21, but yet I'm a teenager that's in there, yet they're providing drinks for me because I'm with a band, right? You know, and so it was a whole different culture than my parents, the farm itself. Right. Certainly very different, even from the disciplines of school, the things that are common, again, as a teen is growing. And so I'm thrust into somewhat of an adult atmosphere, mm-hmm. in that situation. Angie, I've known her since she was 14 years old. I was 16 years old. And so we were both kind of caught up, in some of these circumstances in itself. And we found ourselves clinging to each other. I believe that our love, our passion for each other was very real. But yet we had no idea where these things were leading, where mm-hmm. it was taking us.
I want to interject one question there, and that is, you mentioned that you were raised in a very moral atmosphere, your parents, good Christian people. Do you ever remember having like a spiritual experience with God, or having a revelation of any kind as growing up?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because, even with the religious instruction, of course, even singing in the church choir, right. and things like that. I and another young lady who was a classmate of mine that in the pastor's absence in the Lutheran congregation that we were in, we were frequently asked to fill in the church services. And the first time that I was asked to do so, actually to preach a sermon, as it were, well, does that mean I have to come up with something to say? And the pastor's response, oh, heavens, no. It's all written in a book.
Yeah, it's a liturgy.
And so the liturgy was there, the book was there, and so essentially I just had to read it.
Yeah.
And again, some of the unusual things, and my parents, and again, even with all the good people that I knew in the Lutheran congregation that was there, and I'm sure in many congregations around the world, that even in the church choir that I sang in, and people that were in the church, some of these people were the same individuals who would purchase liquor for me.
Oh, wow.
And, create, again, the confusion. So
right.
I wouldn't say that I had a great revelation of who Jesus was. I believed the things that I'd been taught as a youth. I do believe that God saved me from circumstances because of the amount of alcohol that we consumed. I and my friends, even my brothers as well, a number of car accidents that I was in that I survived. And even my older siblings, often made reference, you got away with everything. And my response was simply is that, well, you wore mom and dad out. And, parents struggle with, how to raise a child. And
Thanks again for listening to the free version of the VBPH Sermon Podcast, where we post sermons on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. We also have a premium version of this podcast, which posts sermons and interviews every single day of the week. So why would you want to subscribe? I'm glad you asked. I have 5 reasons for you. Number 1, on the premium version, we post full versions of Testimony Tuesday, Pastor Campbell Thursday, and Study Day Saturday. If you'd like to hear those episodes, then subscribe now. Reason number 2, uninterrupted listening. We remove all ads and all extraneous content from our premium feed. Reason number 3, premium episodes always release 6 hours earlier than the free version. If you're an early bird, it's a great reason to subscribe. Number 4, our subscribers will gain access to our sermon chat group on WhatsApp, where we interact directly with listeners around the globe. If you'd like to chat with other premium subscribers, subscribe today. And finally, every dollar we raise goes to world evangelism. This is the best reason to subscribe, because you are helping us launch churches all around the world. We don't put one dime in our pockets. Everything that we raise from this podcast will go directly to Thursday night of Chandler Conference. So please subscribe today by using the links in the show notes below. Thanks.
Of course, came along at a time my mother was nearly 40 years old when she had me. Probably didn't have the energy to keep up with me. And it was easier for them perhaps just to let me run a little bit. Had a driver's license with the farmer's permit at 14 years old. And so when we weren't working, I pretty much had the run of the county and stuff. I had a motorcycle also. And so I had a lot of latitude to go places, to do things that I think a lot of other kids my age didn't have. And of course, it affected my studies, even though I made the honor roll a number of times when I was trying to apply myself a little bit harder. I didn't find any sense of reward or attention in doing well in school. And that's where the outlet of music seemed to be something that I grew very fond of. I've made mention at times, and again, I don't want to give the interpretation that I was, some kind of upcoming star or something like that. But I did have those unusual experiences where you have young girls and individuals who come and they want you to sign autographs and things like that. And It's a pretty heady thing when you're just a kid who grew
No
up
kidding.
in an isolated situation.
Yeah.
And there were times that we performed before thousands of people. Probably the largest performance was in Oslo, Norway, actually, some over 10,000 people that had attended there. And so you get a taste of some of that, and you think perhaps this is your future.
Right.
And where could this possibly lead?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being with a group of young people in one of those trips, and we are watching the midnight sun, drinking moonshine and smoking marijuana, and I'm thinking that I've arrived.
Yeah.
in some way, but yet having no inkling whatsoever of where the brokenness that lies in the very near future. Going back to the opportunity for a celebrity and people who were known in the music business, Burt Bacharach, again a songwriter, many hit records and stuff, offering the opportunity at a music education. I can't say or that I was up for that. I don't know that, but it was during that time where this is what was being discussed between my parents and others that were in the community that wanted to provide funding and resources. And it was then that my high school sweetheart, Angie, she was the jeweler's daughter, became pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, during that time, teenage pregnancy wasn't near as frequent or a part of culture as we know. It's become very commonplace now.
Right.
And especially in a small rural community.
Right.
And the impact that it had on our family, the impact in the community, the things that people began to say and whisper, the effect that it had on on Angie, my future wife's family. All these put a tremendous strain on us,
right.
on the relationships that were there, the way faculty viewed me, business people in the community. I said, small community,
right.
Even to the point that I had friends, close friends, many of them that I grew up with since first grade, who told me that once I did join the military, they told me, don't ever come back here. And they meant so compassionately,
yeah.
Just because they said it would be difficult for you and for Angie to have a life here.
Wow. Yeah.
And a lot of people perhaps have a difficult time wrapping their mind around those things, but small town communities, they can be very brutal.
Sure.
In some aspects concerning that. So again, it was during that season where my dad pulled me aside. And of course, he's angry at the circumstances. He's tried to set a good example. He's allowed me some opportunities that my siblings never had, with the hope that I would have been responsible enough to handle it. And so his counsel at that time is, you need to join the military. Forget about your music. Forget about those things. You need to join the military. That will make a man out of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so he withdrew his support,
okay.
which he was supposed to sign some documents, different things, financial things that would determine what kind of funding and things that I would receive. And that's when I signed up to join the Air Force. To assume my responsibility as a father, to put myself in a position to earn my future in-laws' trust.
Okay.
And so 1 week after my high school graduation, I was in Air Force boot camp.
Wow.
And so the military will change your life.
True.
Change your appearance, change your view on authority. And so it did change aspects of my life, brought in a regular income. Angie and I got married shortly after I finished my basic training and had gotten into my Air Force technical training in itself. And so, but it was shortly after the birth of our first daughter, Jessica, that was determined that she was born with a congenital birth disease called hydrocephalus. A lot of people know it as water on the brain. Mm-hmm. And, of course, a very difficult set of circumstances. And for a young couple struggling to make things work, trying to hammer out other relationship issues and a lot of things on our plate for a young couple.
No kidding.
So there were times when it became evident that Jessica was in a lot of pain, unable to sleep, difficult even for her to eat. For those who experience migraines or headaches, might have some sense of what an infant perhaps is having to wrestle with in that. And so when we had the condition diagnosed, there were some surgeries that were performed at Fitzsimmons Army Medical Center in the Colorado Aurora area. Angie and I were reunited for brief periods of time during those operations, etc. And that
was she still living in North Dakota at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
She was completing her school. Since she was a couple of years younger than I was, she completed her junior year through correspondence, skipped a year in school itself, and then while I was still going through training, waiting for my orders for my first permanent duty station, she was completing her senior year at that time so that she could join me later.
And so she's got this little baby with health problems at the same time that you're going through all of this. That's got to put a lot of strain on a relationship.
Yeah, it was very difficult. And of course, when you're young, you're separated. This is your first time in your life that you're distant from everything that you know and love, everything that you're familiar with. You're thrust into groups of people so different than you.
Right.
And I'm meeting people from the big city, New York City, Philadelphia, points beyond, even foreigners that have joined the U.S. Air Force. And so it's a cultural shift in itself. It's fascinating to some degree, but at the same time, you have to get through this training.
Right.
You don't want to wash out.
Right.
You need to complete it. And so eventually I did so successfully and got my orders to Williams Air Force Base.
So with the stress that you were facing of a new family, a child that was serious health problems, a new career, and dealing with all of these changes all of a sudden, what did you find that your alcohol coping mechanism was any better or worse?
Well, when you go through basic training, you don't have access to any of that stuff. Cigarettes are available, and that's pretty much it. But once you complete your basic training, you're in a much more liberal arena or environment. You are responsible for yourself. You're in a dormitory situation but yet you are allowed opportunity to go off base and things like that. And so the moment that those opportunities presented themselves, it was just a matter of time before you were finding alcohol. Of course, at that time, in Colorado, the laws were a little different. They had 3-2 bars and stuff like that. And so, of course, we would purchase harder alcohol and add it to our other drinks and stuff like that. And eventually, just through the right connections, you meet people and you find ways of procuring other types of drugs as well. And that actually kind of began to escalate my experimentation, because now I'm away from family and friends. My wife isn't there either,
right.
And so you look for opportunities to blow off steam, to do things, and so in a way as well, it's a form of self-medication.
Right, right.
You've got all these responsibilities on your shoulder, and you just want to be able to forget about it for a while.
Yeah.
And so that social climate began to add to some of the difficulties and problems that I had.
Okay. So spiritually, did you have any sense of conviction or impending doom? I hear. I never had the terrible experience of being involved in alcohol or drugs like that, but from people that I've spoken to, they say that deep down they know that what they're doing is not right, and there's like a compounding effect of guilt or something. Did you experience any of that?
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I think a lot of times we go through life, we've been saved, God's touched our lives, and sometimes it takes some effort to go back and to rethink just what we were going through and what we were processing. And I distinctly remember times, even before I joined the military, where it would dawn on me that you deserve hell for this.
Right.
My sexual activity, the drugs, the connections that I had, some of the seedy characters, they're so different from, again, the good examples that were in my life.
Right.
And you kind of sense that darkness, I guess is the only way I can describe it, that you're involved in something that's not legal.
Right.
Even in civil society.
Right. So you always looking over your shoulder?
Yeah. And so one of the things that does come to mind is that you're creating this double life.
Right.
In that I know how to be polite. I know how to be kind. I know how to speak in civil society. I know how to be, to carry myself. I've learned some of those things. But there's another life that I have, whether it's the nightlife or the others that I'm procuring drugs or drinking with, the dance floors and things like that. You're leading a dual life, and then getting back even to the military, trying to perform, trying to excel.
Right.
You don't want to be the last man on the totem pole. There's a very competitive atmosphere in that as well. And I'd grown up competitive in a lot of ways. And so even when I got to my permanent duty station, essentially I assigned to a crew. I worked in the aircraft weapons and stuff. And so even in spite of my drug use and alcohol, even when crews would go out and we're handling armaments on planes and things like that, things that a lot of people would consider having some element of danger, because we were familiar with it and we were trained, we didn't think of it as being anything really to worry about per se.
Right.
But we would use those opportunities away from the shop to get high before we performed our jobs and stuff as well. And but yet in the midst of all of that confusion, I found myself actually being selected and to do a training film for Northrop Industries, and that put me into another arena as well, where I actually inhabited a training position where we trained airmen that were coming in to work on the aircraft that was assigned to that squadron, and quality control, and basically in a position of authority I think that I probably didn't deserve in a sense.
Right.
Selected for below the zone promotion. It just unusual thing. All the time that I'm going through all this, it's just, I hope they never find out what I'm doing when I'm not at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I knew that would be devastating in a lot of ways.
Okay. If you want to hear the rest of this testimony, we have a premium version of the podcast that's going to continue, and we'll go ahead and record that second part.
I hope they listen.
Yeah, because there's a lot more to tell.
Thank you so much for listening to the sermon podcast of the Virginia Beach Potter's House Church. Were you blessed by today's message? Let us know. Please leave us a rating on Apple Podcast or on Podchaser. We'll be back next time with another life-changing word from heaven. God bless.